It's just not leaving us. Seems like it's never going to leave us. The Jimmy G stuff, the Jimmy Garoppolo to Houston stuff is just not leaving us. And a lot of times when you hear these types of things, I'm a big follow the source guy. If you listen to my show In the Loop, 10 to 2 Central on Sports Radio 610, the home of the Houston Texans, on the Odyssey app, and on Sports Radio 610, I'm a big follow the source guy. I like to look at reports. I like to look at the reporters that seem to be the most connected to certain stories, and I like to follow the source. And a lot of times when stuff comes out, I'll either put some weight in it, put some stock in it, or I'll dismiss it. Like anything Mike Silver says, whatever. Jason Lockenfora, whatever. But when certain people say certain things, especially about certain teams, that's when it really does get my attention. And the Jimmy Garoppolo report today about there being some momentum in the Texans building about the possibility of bringing in Jimmy G, given who reported it, I do think that we should put at least a little bit of validity to it, because it was Jonathan Jones, now the CBS lead reporter. And Jonathan Jones, quite honestly, if you go back and you type in any of the names of like the 49er assistants that came to Houston, I know there are people locally who maybe tried to take credit for it, not necessarily take credit for it, but report it and say confirm. He was the first guy. He was the first guy, I think, in the majority of those things, Jonathan Jones. I don't know his exact connection. I think he's from California, but regardless, if you go back to just like the D'Amico Ryans being interested in the job and you look at like the assistants, Jonathan Jones was on top of it. So I think he's kind of in the new age of the Texans. Like in the BOB days, it was Rapp and it was Breer. In the Lovie Smith Culley days, I really don't know who it was. Although I know Easterby would leak some stuff to Rapp every once in a while. And now I think we've gotten more local, which is good. Shout out to Brooks Cabina for being the first to get the D'Amico Ryan story. But I do think Jonathan Jones is someone to keep an eye on because he broke a lot of those stories. Like just go back and type in any coach that the Texans hired from San Fran, and he was on top of that. So I do put some stock in the Jimmy Garoppolo thing, which brings me to this. Let's just adjust on the go. And let's just pretend that Jimmy Garoppolo is a real thing in Houston. It is the Locker Room, by the way, number one source for Texans daily digital content. Landry Locker, 10 to 2, Monday through Friday, Central on Sports Radio 610 and the Odyssey app. Subscribe, top source for Texans content right along. Let's adjust to this, though, and let's propose the Jimmy G plan. Let's pretend the Texans really are considering bringing in Jimmy Garoppolo. God, doesn't sound great, does it? But let's pretend they are. First question is, how much is it going to cost? I don't think it's going to cost the money that we're seeing right now with Daniel Jones, Derek Carr, etc. I think Jimmy Garoppolo's inability to stay healthy and his established ceiling makes it such to where I don't think there's going to be too many multi-year deals out there for Jimmy Garoppolo. The one team to watch would be the Raiders. But I don't even know if the Raiders are really going to invest a ton in Jimmy Garoppolo. I think the league kind of has a good idea of what Jimmy Garoppolo is. You could do worse, but let's just pretend. Again, this is not my first plan, but I'm just adjusting because I think Jonathan Jones knows what the hell he's talking about. We've heard what D'Amico Ryan said about Jimmy G, and we know Casario's history. What's it going to cost? 15, 20? Is it really a $30 million guy? Like, are you giving Jimmy Garoppolo $30 million? I find it hard to believe. I just see it as like one of those 1 year, higher than a backup, lower than a Derek Carr type of thing with a lot of incentives in it with Jimmy Garoppolo. I just don't see it costing the $30 million that we think. But regardless of the cost, let's say you bring in Jimmy Garoppolo. What do the Texans do next? Because heading into the draft, that opens up a lot of possibilities. And what will happen is we will start hearing, much like we are about the Chicago Bears, we will start hearing people talking about, well, the Houston Texans are open for business. The Houston Texans are willing to deal. The Houston Texans could trade back because there's going to be some teams that like this quarterback. There's going to be some teams that like that quarterback. And there's going to be some teams that like the other quarterback. And at the end of the day, the price could be the same for the Texans to trade someone to move up from 9 to 2 as the Bears trading someone to move up from 8 to 1. So that opens up a whole lot of possibilities when it comes to Jimmy Garoppolo. And maybe you're not tanking. You're trying to win games when you have Jimmy G in there. Maybe that means this time next year, we're talking about Drake May, we're talking about Caleb Williams, and we're talking about all of those quarterbacks. So I propose the Jimmy Garoppolo plan. I propose this on the air today. Let me know what you think in the comments. Subscribe, all that type of stuff. Step one is to sign Jimmy Garoppolo. How much is it going to cost? Who knows? Let's just throw that aside. Let's let the cap nerds like Texans cap and stuff handle that stuff. Step one is to sign Jimmy Garoppolo. So sign Jimmy G. Step two is to trade back. So the Texans trade back, whether it's with Carolina, whether it's with Atlanta. Don't think you're going to trade with Indianapolis, but trade back. Stockpile multiple first-round picks. You probably end up with 3 first-round picks in the 2024 draft. You probably swap ones with wherever they are. You might even get their second this year, their second next year, third. Who knows? When it comes to trading up for a quarterback to 2, you're getting a lot, just like we're talking about with Chicago. Whatever Chicago gets, chances are you're going to get that same thing. So trade back, draft players. The only for sure thing that I think you need to get a receiver. Jackson Smith and Jigba. That's my guy. So trade back, draft players, stock up on players, stock up on needs. Would have to know the exact draft spot to be able to start naming names, but draft players. So that would be step 3, draft players. Step 4, get a hooker. I'm not talking about a street hooker. I'm talking about Hendon Hooker. And my thinking on this is, and if you've heard me talk about Hendon Hooker, I've talked about Hendon Hooker in a different context because I don't think Hendon Hooker warrants a first-round pick. So if we're talking about Bryce Young or Hendon Hooker, I'm taking Hendon Hooker. But the quarterbacks after Bryce Young, I don't know. I think the ceiling is higher for a couple of those guys, but I don't know that the floor is that much higher, if that makes sense. Ceiling is like the ultimate potential, like the imaginary stuff they're coming up with for Anthony Richardson. And floor is what's the worst case scenario? What does it look like? I would not bet on Hendon Hooker being a 10-year franchise quarterback. But I would not bet on him just being a complete disaster in the NFL. I think he'd be able to run an offense. I think he's really good at reading defenses when it comes to like RPOs and stuff. I think he's really good at throwing the deep ball. So Hendon Hooker, like if we're talking about CJ Stroud versus Hendon Hooker, of course you would take CJ Stroud. But if you're going to have Jimmy Garoppolo and he's going to be starting anyways, and Hendon Hooker is an older guy, he's coming off the torn ACL, then Hendon Hooker might be someone that you just keep around. Because if you draft Hendon Hooker, whenever it is, late first, early second, whatever, with the extra draft equity, you can keep trading down after you trade down one time. We could add multiple steps in there. But if you draft him, you have Jimmy Garoppolo. You can maybe get a look at some point in the season because Jimmy can't stay healthy. And maybe Jimmy doesn't play well and you want to get a look at Hooker. You can get a look at Hooker and figure out what he's working with. So it's actually the perfect plan. Step 1, sign Jimmy G. Step 2, trade back. Step 3, draft players or trade back. And step 4, look at Hendon Hooker. I'm on board with it. If they are going to bring in Jimmy G. And again, it goes back to what I said at the beginning of this. The only reason that the Jimmy G plan is even here is because it's Jonathan Jones with the report. And Jonathan Jones is a guy who has been all over stuff Texans since D'Amico Ryans got here. So I do think you need to put some sort of stock in it. So step 1, sign Jimmy G. Step 2, trade back. Step 3, draft players. Step 4, get a hooker. What say you? How would you feel if they brought in Jimmy Garoppolo? Would that be your worst case scenario? Would that be your best case scenario? Would you rather just step two, be stay put and take Will Anderson or Jalen Carter? Would you still rather go with, and again, this is all under the assumption too, that Bryce Young's gone. Because I think Bryce Young is QB1. I think Bryce Young goes first. If you can get Bryce Young too, that's my dream scenario. I've made that very clear on this channel. But let's say that Bryce Young is gone. Do you still draft CJ Stroud even if you bring in Jimmy Garoppolo? Do you want to swing for the fences on AR-15? Anthony Richardson? What say you? Does a Jimmy G plan make sense to you? The dream for me, though, Bryce Young 2, Jackson Smith and Jigba 12, Jahmyr Gibbs 33. That's your big three right there. That's your billboard. Put that on a billboard. Bryce Young, Jackson, Jahmyr Gibbs, all on one billboard. How do you feel about the Jimmy G plan? Because Jonathan Jones ain't no joke. If he says there's some momentum in the building, I'm taking his word for it. He broke a lot of news that he didn't get credit for locally. And I thought it was I think he's one of those guys as we adjust and follow the stories. I think he's someone you need to look at. We know what Jimmy G is, though. He's not Derek Carr. He's not awful. Some would say they'd rather see Davis Mills than Jimmy G. I don't know that I disagree with those guys, but for some reason, there's belief that Bobby Slowick, D'Amico, Nick, maybe they just don't love these quarterbacks. Maybe they love Bryce Young. Maybe they don't feel confident enough about the quarterback that they'd get it to, so they would want Jimmy G to hold it down and that quarterback learn behind Jimmy G. Maybe that's the plan. Maybe the plan is, whether it's Young, whether it's AR-15, whether it's Will Levis, God, I hate even saying that, or Stroud, maybe they just want Jimmy G to hold it down. Be interesting. But the Jimmy G plan, what do you think of my Jimmy G plan? What would your Jimmy G plan? If the Texans signed Jimmy Garoppolo, what would you think? I want to touch on a few nugs going on with the Texans right now. Look ahead to tomorrow. Tomorrow is something that's we're going to witness for the first time around here. Not significant to a lot of people, but to me, the self-proclaimed podium critic, I'm excited for it. We'll get to that in a sec, but I kind of want to touch on something that I've just found myself being extremely amused about, but I had a listener, shout out to the loopholes. If you listen, you are one. I had a listener of In the Loop on Sports Radio 610 and the Odyssey app kind of call me on something. And I took a step back and I said, you know what? He might be right. He or she might be right. And that's why I like interacting with you on here in the locker room. Number one source for Texans digital content is because we're not always right about sports. Like, it's serious, but it ain't that serious. Like, I'm going to be wrong 100 times. I'm not going to like completely toot my horn when I'm right. Sometimes I might a little bit more than others, but that's the beauty is you get on the streets, you get on the digital streets with the people, you talk to people. And sometimes there's some really good ideas that are brought up. And sometimes there's some stuff that kind of makes you just look at things or look at yourself and say, you know what? It's a pretty damn good point. But I was talking about the hilarity of the Anthony Richardson hype because I think it's getting kind of out of control. I think the comparisons that are being made, they aren't even valid. Like the Josh Allen comparison makes no sense because Josh Allen went back to Wyoming an extra year and developed. Like he's said himself multiple times that if he had not gone back to school to Wyoming that final year when he didn't have any weapons around him and stuff, he wouldn't have been prepared to do what he did in the NFL or has done in the NFL. And he actually got off to a slow start. David Culley was his quarterback coach. So I don't put a lot of stock in the Josh Allen comparison. I heard Louis Riddick bring up Jalen Hurts too. And I think that's even a more silly comparison. And I think Louis Riddick's great at what he does. I think sometimes he's a little bit smug and he tries to he tries to say like there's other people are thinking simplistically, and I think he's actually the one thinking simplistically in this situation. But he basically said, people were saying this about Jalen Hurts, and he came in and surprised a lot of people in the NFL. Again, Jalen Hurts went back to school for another year. He went to Oklahoma, completed 70% of his passes. Like Jalen Hurts went from probably a 5th-round pick to a 2nd-round pick. So he completely elevated his stock. He was the Heisman runner-up. So comparing Hurts and Richardson, I don't see the comparison at all. Then you're hearing, the coach can develop and the coach can figure some stuff out. Okay. How valuable is that last year on campus? Like, would Joe Burrow be Joe Burrow without that final year at LSU? Jalen Hurts would not be Jalen Hurts without that final year at OU. Josh Allen says he would not have been Josh Allen without that final year at Wyoming. I think Anthony Richardson is a guy who needed to go back to school, assuming that he is capable of what people say he's capable of. Because if he's capable of it, he would have gone back to school and he would have smashed. I'm hearing the Cam Newton comparison too. Cam Newton carried Auburn. I think he carried Blinn Junior College to a national championship, and then he carried Auburn to a national championship. So all these guys that we're comparing him to, they at some time carried their college team to a pretty decent level, and not all of them had ideal talent around them. Some did, some didn't. So I'm not seeing these comparisons. The other thing that I've just thought is funny is I'm hearing all these questions like about durability and, Bryce Young's durability. He missed a game and a half at Alabama with a shoulder injury. Anthony Richardson, and a lot of people don't know this, and I know a lot of you probably don't, so don't act like you did. Anthony Richardson had multiple games missed with a hamstring injury. He had a knee surgery at the end of the 2021 season, and he missed a game after having a concussion. So he had a concussion, hamstring injury that kept him out of games, a knee surgery, and after he got cleared from a concussion, he hurt his knee dancing. He hurt his knee dancing to where he had to miss a college football game because he hurt his knee dancing. Now you can say, well, that's a fluke accident. And that, how many quarterbacks have you heard miss a game because they hurt their knee dancing? I'm all about dancing. Celebrate. I was the biggest Cam Newton fan there was. But how many times have you heard a quarterback who had a hamstring issue, who had a knee surgery, miss a game after a concussion dancing? Look, Josh Allen was banged up in college. We've seen guys get banged up in college. All I'm saying is a guy that has played less football than any of the other other 3 top prospects, he's missed more time than all of them because of a hamstring, a knee injury, dancing, and a concussion. I'm just saying. I find it funny. But the thing that a listener brought up to me that I think might be true, and maybe I'm wrong. I know there are a few of them. But he brought up on the text line that maybe I'm kind of strawmanning this Anthony Richardson hype. And maybe it's just a small select few of people that are even entertaining the possibility that the Texans should draft Anthony Richardson number 2. Maybe I'm kind of guilty of just taking a couple of opinions and magnifying them. Something that I say that I'm against. I try to minimize straw man arguments, but he might be right. Maybe there's a lot more people that are pro Bryce Young, pro CJ Stroud, and this Anthony Richardson stuff, it's just a small group, but it's so outlandish to me and so silly, in my opinion, again, that maybe I'm just kind of straw manning it. So maybe I'm guilty as charged there. Maybe I'm the guilty as charged. I do think that the Anthony Richardson group is funny because they want to say, like, don't talk durability. That's the one thing I will say. Like, don't talk durability when it comes to him and Bryce Young, because that's not Anthony Richardson has the durability issues. But maybe I'm strawmanning it. Who knows? One thing I do want to say, though, is Dan Orlovsky is out of control. The thing that Dan Orlovsky does, and I think a lot of people in media do this, is and it works with the majority of your audience. So I'm not faulting him. But with someone like me who does this for a living, who follows the draft and remembers what people say, it just doesn't work as easily. And I'm not a fan of like taking what someone says. Like every once in a while, you'll touch on, what the national narrative is about the Texans. But during the draft, there's a select few people who are put on this much of a pedestal. And when you follow the draft as close as we do in our profession year to year, you typically remember what people say. Like, I wanted the Texans to hire Josh McCown 2 years ago. You guys remember that. Like, the McCown train. You all remember that. I thought it was a low risk, potentially high reward type of thing. I'd been talking about Josh McCown being a head coach for a long time, and I had the McCown train, and people to this day still remind me of it, and it's all fun because I said it. Now, there's probably a portion of my audience that I could just sit here and say, I never supported this Josh McCown thing. I was never in favor of that. That was a joke to begin with. And some people, because the audience changes, they might look to me and say, oh, okay, well, yeah, you're smart. You didn't do that. But there's a portion of the loyal audience that listens to me daily, that listens to my opinion, good or bad, that would say, what kind of slime ball are you, bro? you were tooting the horn for the McCown train. Kind of slime ball are you to sit there and act like you didn't say that? And I've also seen Dan on Twitter. He said to our sister station, 105.3 The Fan, that he just says stuff for TV. He said it in a tweet one time. But I've seen Dan Orlovsky, and for whatever reason, every quarterback now that does anything like phenomenal on tape is Josh Allen. He said it last year about Malik Willis. Hell, he said Malik Willis was doing Patrick Mahomes things. So he compared Malik Willis to Josh Allen. He went on the Dan Patrick show. And if you go watch the Dan Patrick interview with Dan Orlovsky, you can tell Dan Patrick is kind of like a little annoyed by the Josh Allen, Anthony Richardson comparison, because he kind of presses Orlovsky, and Orlovsky's kind of tripping over his words when Dan is asking him questions, because he's not used to getting the pushback on it. But he basically said, and he retweeted it this morning and put a finger down. And that's the other thing I don't like about this. Like, it's one thing to just forget that something happened, but now you want to toot your horn for saying something. Like, what are we doing here? Like, I don't understand it. So Orlovsky goes on with Dan Patrick, and he's talking about, and I won't play it here. Just go check out the Dan Patrick show, the Orlovsky one, because I don't want to get the copyright thing. But he says, and I was rolling my eyes at the Josh Allen completion percentage too, because I thought that was ridiculous. And, you look at how good Josh Allen is as a thrower and stuff. And Orlovsky's basically comparing everyone to Josh Allen now, and he's rewriting the history and basically saying that, he was down with Josh Allen from day one. But then a simple internet search, because I didn't remember him being big on Josh Allen. A simple internet search, and this is from a Monday morning quarterback podcast with Dan Orlovsky. A simple internet search shows this quote from Dan Orlovsky. When the ball is snapped, it's almost like I don't know what's going on. It seems like he doesn't have a plan and a process to get in the NFL level, and to not be able to do little things. If you can't do little things, you can't do the big things. The little things are your plan and your process. The big things are executing what happens. And so it seems like he just doesn't have that part in his DNA as part of his quarterbacking. And that, for me, I go, well, what does it matter? How big is he? How athletic is he? If you could throw it to the moon, the field's 100 yards. To not be able to adjust or react to a will linebacker blitzing is alarming to me. Alarming. Bro, there are receipts now, sir. There are receipts now. I feel like Dan Orlovsky's lost his damn mind. And Josh Allen should go Birdman. Like Josh Allen should go Birdman on the Breakfast Club and walk into ESPN and talk to Louis Riddick and talk to Dan Orlovsky and say, put some respect on my name. Not every quarterback that comes out is me. Put some respect on my name. I'm pulling up on you. Just a little bit silly. Couple other things in the Texans news. Justin Britt is gone. Remember when Lovie Smith promised us an update on that Friday when Justin Britt was gone and then got mad at Mark Berman for asking about the update? I guess we got the update now. Justin Britt, contract terminated, never should have been brought back in the first place, was always kind of one of those, had the feel of kind of one of those fake leaders where the leadership was way too romanticized for what the actual quality of the player was. But Justin Britt is gone. And tomorrow, 10 a.m., Odyssey app, AUDACY app, Sports Radio 610, right there in the loop, show of record, 10 to 2 Central. We're going to hear from the coordinators. We're going to hear from Bobby Slowick. We're going to hear from Matt Burke. Bobby Slowick, I'm told, is a very analytical, nerdy type of dude. So we're going to hear his offensive philosophy. Nothing wrong with being a nerdy dude. I'm actually a big fan of that. And then Matt Burke, the defensive coordinator, we'll hear from him. Will he be calling defense? What's he going to bring to the table? I know there was more excitement with the Slowick hire than the Burke, but you'll hear both of them speak tomorrow at 10 a.m. So the Jimmy G plan, what do you think? Yay or nay? And let's pretend that they do sign Jimmy G. What should their next steps be? Should they trade down? Should they draft a quarterback? What should they do? And what should they do in free agency, which, by the way, begins in less than a week? No live tonight. My voice is shot. If you can't tell, I got arrested. I've been talking too much. I've been traveling too much. I've been going all over the place. So I'm going to try to get right for the show tomorrow. But I appreciate you all for riding along. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Probably going to do a little bit of live action tomorrow, as well as another video. And I'll talk to you at 10 a.m. Central. We'll hear from Bobby Slowick. We'll hear from Matt Burke. The Jimmy G plan, what say you? Subscribe, like. This has been The Locker Room. No matter what happens with the Texans, just remember we are all in this together. Have a good one.